I recently finished reading a book which was called The Failed Franciscan, and it's by a person by the name of T.C. O'Brien. I don't push books here, but it is a good one to try and read because the subtitle of this book is Trying to Weave Franciscan Spirituality into Everyday Life and Not Always Succeeding. It's an interesting thing that got me thinking about our view, Franciscan view of failure. Franciscan spirituality offers something our world desperately needs: a different way of seeing our struggles. At the heart of this ancient wisdom lies a truth that shifts everything. Here's the truth: we matter because we are made in the image of God, not because of what we accomplish or fail to accomplish. This isn't just a spiritual theory. It's a lifeline for those moments when we feel like we're drowning in our own inadequacy. The Franciscan path doesn't ask us to avoid failure. It invites us to walk through it differently. Sometimes holiness provokes discomfort, creates tension, even generates conflict. Yet these very challenges become doorways rather than dead ends when we learn to see them through different eyes. These centuries-old Franciscan teachings really speak to our modern struggle with perfectionism. Can they help us when we're paralyzed by the fear of falling short? Franciscan wisdom extends beyond simple principles to a way of living that changes our entire relationship with failure. This isn't about quick fixes or easy answers. It's about discovering timeless truth that meets us exactly where we are. Before we can embrace a different way of seeing our setbacks, we need to understand the heart of Franciscan wisdom. This isn't academic theory. It's lived experience that's guided countless souls through their darkest moments. St. Francis of Assisi left us more than just spiritual concepts. He showed us a way of living that still speaks to our deepest needs. The values that emerged from his life create a framework for living authentically: service to the poor and marginalized, reverence for the dignity of each person, care for all creation, peacemaking and reconciliation, formation of caring communities. These values breathe with the basic goodness of life, expressing joy and optimism while never losing sight of justice. They guide us toward building a world that's more just, peaceable, and humane. What makes them beautiful is their flexibility. They leave room for personal interpretation and individual experience. The Franciscan tradition welcomes diversity of thought, faiths, and cultures while holding firm to service, humility, and contemplation. Peace in this understanding means being in a right relationship with yourself and everybody in your life. This becomes our foundation for seeing failure, not as defeat, but as invitation. St. Francis once said, "A man is what he is in the sight of God, and nothing more." These words really reveal the heart of Franciscan spirituality, the beautiful power of poverty and humility that changes everything about how we see ourselves. Humility acknowledges our nothingness apart from God and our complete dependence upon God. Francis grasped something profound. Without God, we can do nothing. Even our next breath depends upon divine sustenance. True humility that recognizes that our competence is from God. But Franciscan poverty goes deeper than material simplicity. Francis embraced poverty, not out of idealism, but because Christ did. He saw that in becoming human, God had made himself poor in our world. For Francis, poverty meant liberation, the freedom to recognize our powerlessness apart from divine grace. Without divine grace, we're powerless. Most beautifully, Franciscan poverty is the freedom to recognize that myself, by itself, is powerless and ineffective. And this isn't harsh self-criticism. It's freedom from pretense, permission to be authentically who we are. And here's where Francis's wisdom gets radical. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's a part of it. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is a part of it. This isn't just clever wordplay. It completely reshapes how we experience our setbacks. When failure becomes part of success rather than its enemies, everything changes. Our failures become progress on the road to our success. Instead of reasons to quit, the only real failure becomes not to try. Each stumble serves as an invaluable teaching opportunity that shows us our boundaries and sparks growth. Our failures also remind us that we're imperfect and we need each other, helping us to savor success without slipping into arrogance. Even Pope Francis models this beautifully, acknowledging his own failures and apologizing with genuine humility. His example shows how failure, when met with honesty, becomes an opportunity for deeper conversion. Failure doesn't stand opposite to success. It becomes the dawn of success, preparing the ground where real fruit can grow. This truth lies at the center of what Francis always knew. Our worth comes from who we are in God's eyes, not from what we had failed or achieved to fail. Our worth comes from who we are in God's eyes, not from what we achieve or fail to achieve. Sometimes the most profound truths hide in plain sight. We see this clearly when we look at two lives that change the world, not through triumph, but through what looked like complete failure. Jesus and St. Francis show us something that turns our assumptions upside down. Their greatest moments of spiritual impact didn't come through success as we understand it. They came through apparent defeat. Picture the scene. A man hanging naked on a cross, dying the death reserved for slaves and criminals. Nothing about crucifixion sounded or suggested honor or victory. Roman authorities designed this execution specifically to be shameful, humiliating, torturous, a slow death by asphyxiation that could stretch for days. Jewish law made it even worse, declaring that anyone hung on a tree is under God's curse. So Jesus' death appeared not just as physical defeat, but spiritual rejection. Isaiah had prophesied it. He was despised and rejected by others, a man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity. And as one from whom others hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him of no account. Yet, this apparent catastrophe became the cornerstone of our Christian faith. Pope Francis put it beautifully. When we contemplate the cross, the mark of Christians, we contemplate a sign of defeat, but also a sign of victory. This contradiction reveals something essential about how God works. Divine power shows up most clearly through human weakness. In addition, Francis, born to wealth and privilege in Assisi, made the shocking choice to walk away from everything that society valued. His literal departure from the city to live with lepers and outcasts at the Porciuncula sent a clear message. He was rejecting his former life entirely. When Francis embraced Lady Poverty, it scandalized his contemporaries. Picture the scene in the town square. His father demanding he return home, and Francis stripping off his clothes, giving back even his garments. He chose to be considered foolish. God has called me by the way of humility and simplicity, Francis declared. The Lord told me what he wanted. He wanted me to be a new fool for the world. And Francis faced rejection beyond society's scorn. As his brotherhood grew, many friars abandoned his strict poverty, wanting rather to be comfortable and have comfortable accommodations. This betrayal led Francis into what we might call a depression today. Yet through this painful rejection, he discovered deeper levels of spiritual surrender. Both Jesus and Francis reveal something startling. Losses can become disguised blessings. The pivotal points which allow us to transform our lives with wisdom and acceptance. Watch how Francis handled his suffering. Even with the painful stigmata, and it was painful, he continued serving others despite physical agony. This shows us that the Franciscan understanding that our challenges aren't obstacles, but doorways to something greater. What are Franciscan values if not this radical way of seeing? The spiritual tradition teaches us that God uses whatever necessary to cleanse us from our egoism, to purify us of every false belief, and ultimately to lead us to himself. Our greatest spiritual breakthroughs often come precisely when we stop clinging to outcomes, when we detach from success and ultimately from any created thing. That's when we discover that what Jesus and Francis knew, that sometimes losing everything means finding what matters most. So now, knowing about Franciscan wisdom is one thing. Actually walking through failure with grace, what is it? That's another story entirely. And the good news is that Franciscan tradition offers us some practical tools, not theoretical concepts, but real practices that have helped people face their darkest moments for centuries. These aren't magical formulas, but they are pathways that can change how we experience our setback. Prayer anchors our walk together, especially when everything feels unsteady. This isn't about perfect words or formal requests. It's about creating space for divine presence right in the middle of our mess. Franciscan prayer cultivates something our culture often avoids: vulnerability. As one practitioner put it, prayer becomes the school of relationship and particularity. Here's what strikes me about this. Our capacity to truly hear others directly impacts how our ability to hear God. Our capacity to truly hear others directly impacts our ability to hear God. Those who struggle to listen during conversations will find it difficult to perceive divine guidance when life gets hard. Prayer becomes the place where we learn to listen before we speak. Real dialogue requires something rare, genuine curiosity about what others are experiencing. The Franciscan approach flips our usual pattern. Listen first, understand second, and speak last. This replaces debate, where someone has to win, with something that becomes sacred. One Franciscan source explains, something happens when both speaking and listening are reverenced. Even when we disagree, empathy and respect can build bridges that debate never could. When we're dealing with our own failures, this kind of dialogue helps us to connect with others who understand our struggles. St. Francis gave his brothers striking advice about those who had fallen. Love him more than me, so that you may draw him to the Lord, and always be merciful. Those were the words that Francis always used in correcting or taught any brother who may have fallen or strayed. This isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about resolving it through patient negotiation. Reconciliation recognizes something profound. Mercy flows in two directions. God shows mercy to us, and we extend mercy to others. Sounds familiar. Words we say all the time. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Sometimes we need to reconcile with people who've hurt us during our failures. Other times, we need to reconcile with ourselves. We've all heard, time heals all wounds. But Franciscan wisdom knows better. Without proper attention, wounds fester. Healing requires both time and intentionality. The process involves acknowledging hurt, setting appropriate boundaries, yet still choosing forgiveness. This journey unfolds gradually through repeated acts of mercy, not just once, but again and again. Some of our deepest failures take years to heal from. But that's not weakness. That's human. Here's where everything shifts. Francis demonstrated something radical. If our only goal is to love, there is no such thing as failure. When we surrender control and certainty, we enter what one writer calls the bright abyss, where conventional measures of success become meaningless. It doesn't mean we stop trying or caring. It means we stop letting outcomes just determine our worth. If our only goal is love, then every stumble becomes another opportunity to practice grace. Something shifts when we stop running from our failures. That moment when we turn toward what we've been avoiding, that's where transformation begins. This isn't easy territory to walk. Our instincts tell us to hide, to fix, to somehow make ourselves acceptable again. But Franciscan spirituality whispers a different invitation. What if our brokenness is exactly where grace finds us? We spend so much energy holding on. Our ego grabs at achievement, status, the image that we want others to see. It's exhausting, this constant grasping, because deep down, we know that none of it truly satisfies. Francis understood something profound about letting go. When he stripped off his fine clothes in that town square, returning even his garments to his father, he wasn't just rejecting wealth. He was discovering freedom. Each thing he released, his inheritance, his plans, even control over his own spiritual community, brought him closer to what actually mattered. The soul operates differently than the ego. Where ego grasps, the soul learns to release. Where ego demands control, the soul finds peace and surrender. When Francis watched his vision for radical poverty crumble as his order grew and changed, he could have become bitter. Instead, he turned inward. He surrendered to what he called the poverty of feeling nothing. That dark place where even our spiritual consolations disappear. Sometimes our failures crack us open in ways success never could. The job we didn't get, the relationship that ended, the dream that died. These experiences strip away our illusions about being in control. And in that vulnerable space, we discover something unexpected. We're not alone. Our struggles with control often become the very places where grace meets us. When we can no longer manage the outcome, we're finally free to receive what we cannot earn. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. These words of Jesus capture something that defies our logic. How can losing become finding? How can powerlessness become freedom? Francis lived this paradox. The more he allowed himself to become small in the world's eyes, the more radiant he became. His willingness to be seen as foolish opened space for divine love to shine through him. What if our failures aren't obstacles to overcome, but invitations to let go? What if the very things that make us feel powerless are actually doorways to a different kind of strength? When we open our hands instead of clenching them, we discover something our success-driven world cannot teach us. Radical powerlessness can become radical freedom. Not because we're giving up, but because we're finally trusting the one who holds us, even when we can't hold ourselves together. Our world measures everything by success. Bigger houses, better titles, more followers, higher numbers. The scoreboard never stops. Yet Franciscan wisdom asks us to step off this treadmill entirely. It isn't easy. When everyone around us climbs the same ladder, choosing a different path feels risky. What will people think? Will we matter if we're not constantly achieving? Franciscan values offer something our fragmented world desperately needs. Purpose that doesn't depend on performance. They invite us to see beyond achievements to what actually matters. Reverence for each person's dignity, care for creation, building communities of peace. Those who embrace this path often find and discover something unexpected. We become more fully human when we stop trying to prove ourselves, our worth, through accomplishments. The Franciscan approach demands a deliberate departure from societal norms. At its core lies a commitment to simplicity amidst complexity, peace amidst conflict. This path requires seeing the world through God's eyes, recognizing the inherent worth of all creation beyond utility or productivity. Francis lived this countercultural witness. He practiced what some call attending, praying, paying attention to what surrounds us, and inhabiting, making emotional and moral commitments to specific places and people. Francis lived this countercultural witness. He practiced what some call attending, paying attention to what surrounds us, and inhabiting, making emotional and moral commitments to specific places and people. This costs us something. It means choosing vulnerability over invulnerability. It means prioritizing relationships over results. It means finding joy even when we're not winning. When failure strikes, and it will, we have choices to make. Embodying Franciscan values during these moments means shifting from looking out for ourselves as individuals toward making the world a better place. First, embrace vulnerability instead of hiding our struggles. Second, prioritize relationships over results, especially when everything in us wants to focus on fixing the problem. Third, choose joy even amid setbacks, not because we're in denial, but because our worth isn't tied to outcomes. This way of living goes against everything our culture teaches, yet perhaps that's exactly why we need it. Failure will find each of us. And that's not pessimism. It's simply life. What matters isn't whether we stumble, but how we respond when we do. Our walk together through Franciscan wisdom reveals something our success-hungry world desperately needs to hear. There's another way to live with our setbacks. We don't have to let our failures write the final chapter of our story. St. Francis knew this secret. Jesus lived it completely. They showed us that our deepest defeats often become doorways to unexpected freedom. When we stop running from failure and start walking through it, everything changes. The tools we've discovered, prayer, dialogue, reconciliation, time, and embracing failure itself, aren't complicated formulas. They're simple practices that meet us exactly where we are. When we're sitting in the wreckage of our plans, feeling small and broken, these ancient wisdoms whisper, "You are beloved exactly as you are." This way of living goes against everything our culture teaches us. While the world shouts that we must achieve to matter, Franciscan spirituality quietly insists we already do. When others chase success to prove their worth, this path invites us to rest in the worth we've always possessed. Disappointments still come? Of course. Will we still feel the sting when things don't work out? Absolutely. But now we know something different about these moments. They're not evidence of our inadequacy. They're invitations to discover grace we didn't know we needed. If our goal is to love, St. Francis taught, failure becomes impossible. That's not naive optimism. It's the hardest, most practical wisdom anyone can offer. When love becomes our measure, our stumbles become part of the dance. Our walk together continues, one imperfect step at a time. And that's exactly how it's meant to be.